Good morning, everyone. This is Jim Gitney, Carol Marzouk, and Tim Croushore. And we want to thank you for joining us today to talk about recession planning and fine-tuning your business model. I'd like to introduce the three of us real quick. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Jim Gitney. I've held multiple C-suite positions, and primarily 30 years of my career was in operations. And in the last 14 years, I've been the CEO of Group 50. It's actually now 16 years, given that it's 2020. And I've been involved in 11 operational and financial restructurings, and heavily involved in supply chains and the optimization of those supply chains. I'd like to take a moment and introduce Tim.
Good morning, Tim Croushore here. I'm a managing director with Moss Adams. I lead the Southern California and Phoenix valuation and consulting practice. I've been doing valuation work and other financial consulting since 1984. So that is I'm the old guy. It's a long time. Done work for a lot of purposes, a lot of tax work, anything where value is a question. As it relates to this particular topic, though, I've done a lot of work in the bankruptcy space, both in pre-pack as well as contested bankruptcies, and a lot of restructuring work in an effort to avoid that, which is a stressful environment for the company, a stressful environment for the stakeholders, and not dissimilar to where we are today.
Great, thank you, Tim, for joining us. And last but not least, Carol Marzouk.
Hi, everyone. I work with the big egos in organizations. So if there are people that are getting in their own way and really bringing toxicity into the workplace, they call me. They call me the executive lion tamer, because I help people communicate in a way that builds relationships instead of destroys relationships. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for joining us, Carol. Okay, so here's the highlights of what we're going to talk about today. As you all know, COVID-19 is resetting the landscape in both our personal lives and our professional lives. And that landscape continues to change, much like quicksand, in that last night the federal government approved a $2 trillion package of financial relief. And over the next few days or over the next few weeks, we're going to spend our time focusing on what that means for our business. In the meantime, most leaders are focused on their people and immediate needs rather than longer-term strategies. Now, the government bailout will help, but we need to make sure that there is a lot of effort being done by senior leaders to work on the business as well as in the business. For the moment, this is not about profitability. This is about survivability. And it's very important that senior leaders work hard on creating the appropriate environment and the proper methodologies to allow their business to survive. So that's a highlight of what we're going to talk about today. Focus on finance, operations, and leadership. And if you have any questions, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button, and we'd like you to enter those questions, and at the end, we'll have time to provide some answers from each one of the panelists. At this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to Tim.
Jim, thank you. And I guess going through this process, the header of the slide's a little bit frightening, but it's not. It's not out of bounds in terms of where we are today. The important thing is to understand where you are at, where your company is at. It's clear that the, well, this too shall pass mentality or approach is not going to work. So the first thing that we suggest is that you go out and assess where you are. And where you are is taking a look at your balance sheet, taking a look at your resources, cash in hand, and then putting together what in the bankruptcy space would be a 13-week cash plan. It's day by day, dollars in and dollars out. When will you expect to see these dollars come in from your clients, your receivables get converted to cash? When will you have to pay bills? When will you have to pay your employees? When will you have to pay the electric bill, the water bill, rent? And so you'll know, looking at that plan, really how long you can afford to go the way you're going, when you'll have to make some serious changes to your expense structure, and at what point in time you might have to reach out for some help. One of the things that we're hearing that's somewhat surprising, but actually a good thing, is that many of your insurance policies are likely to have business interruption coverage in them back somewhere in that 100-page document. It's worth your time to go through that document, perhaps engage an attorney who's familiar with the insurance process and policies and their structure, and have them review it to see if you do have some relief in the form of business interruption coverage. Again, the point here is generate and conserve cash. And it's a better conversation with your suppliers and your customers to identify what you're going to be able to do for them and for how long you're going to be able to do it, to have that conversation up front. If you call your customers and say, hey, look, we're prepared to offer a discount if you pay more quickly. Can we accelerate some payments? What can we do? What are you in a position to do to help? And we can get through this. Similarly, if the people you owe money to, you're better off calling them today and saying, hey, look, the invoices we have, we're going to pay. But the ones that we receive effective today, we're going to extend. And work through that process. That conversation will go better now than it will after you've been forced to do some things. Similarly, contact your bank and your lender. Talk about deferment or reduction in payments. We're hearing banks now are taking 90 days worth of payments and tacking it onto the back of the loan term and giving you some relief to work through this process. Discuss perhaps a new or extended line of credit. Part of the SBA process is out there. I know that their website was up but crashed yesterday, where they're extending loans that are as long as 30 years for as much as $2 million to small businesses. That definition of a small business has been something in flux, but for the most part, you're self-certifying that you're a small business. So if you look at your industry, and if you're in the retail space, you've got a lot of big retail. Costco, for example, would make any of us look small. So you can really self-define a little bit in that area. And that we got some clarification on that actually this morning, that's the way that process is going to work. Similarly, with your occupancy costs, your landlords are going to be looking at you, wondering what's going on in your world. Start a conversation with them. If you need relief, it's a good conversation to have before you've missed a payment. Discuss if you can either tack it on the back of your lease, reduce your rate for a while, or even negotiate an extension to your existing lease at perhaps a little bit better rate for them in exchange for 90 days of deferment now. Again, any of these things are available to be discussed. And the point of all of this in the last couple of bullets is cash is king. We want to get as much as we can and conserve it and see how, stretch this out as long as we can, because we don't really know at this point in time where the bottom is. We hope, we're looking at other countries and how their COVID-19 reaction has worked, and hoping that ours will work as well. But we don't know for sure that the bottom is right around the corner, or a month away, or 2 months away, or 3 months away. So again, plan for the worst and hope for the best. And finally, pay very close attention to the government process. This new bill that's in the process of being passed will have relief in it for most of us. Keep an eye on it, pay attention to it, and get what you can in the form of help. Next slide. Maybe. There we go. And again, we're making changes. Everyone's making changes. We're presenting this webinar out of home offices, and you're likely in a similar position. We are in a new normal. And things that we're going to do to adapt and survive, they're going to be challenged perhaps by our employees and our stakeholders if we decide to take them back. So things like work from home, business travel, discounts that you provide to your customers to promote quicker payments, all of these things are, to the extent the other side of that equation likes it, they're not going to be thrilled when you say, okay, back to business as usual. So really the key here is to evaluate the sustainability and efficacy of the changes you're making. You're likely to make some changes you wouldn't have made. And at the end of this process, as we get near the end of this process, evaluate them in terms of whether or not they should be permitted to continue. Keep them in place, and adopt it or tackle this question not only from your perspective, but from the perspective of your employees or your stakeholders. See it from their perspective. If your employees are benefiting from more work from home and less business travel on their work-life balance, and you haven't seen a real negative impact, it can be something worth adopting. Next slide. This is something that we're all familiar with, that there has been a significant change in the value. I don't even open my 401k. It's just scary and depressing, and I'll look at it in a year or so and see where it's at. But depending on your industry, we've seen value shifts of 30% or more in the public markets. For the larger organizations that have audited financial statements that have done transactions, you likely have some goodwill or intangible assets on your financial statements from that prior transaction. You can expect an impairment conversation with your audit firm, whether or not that goodwill is still there. It's typically the first thing to get extinguished in a loss in value, and whether or not you expect it to come back. Those are all very valid conversations. And really, unless you're in the business of making toilet paper or N95 masks, your company is likely dealing with a downturn in revenue. There are things that you might consider in the business world and your personal lives where having a lower value would be a benefit to you. For example, granting shares or options to your employees. With a lower value, there's a lower implied tax on that number. Gifting shares to your heirs, wealth transfer, now is a terrific time to do that. Because in addition to the loss in value that we've seen in the markets, we have uncertainty, and uncertainty is risk. So you can really drive a substantial shift in value to your heirs through a gifting program at a much lower cost than you could have 2 months ago. And hopefully in 2 more months from now, but certainly now is a good time to work through that. So, and there will, as we get to the bottom of this, the bottom of the trough, there will be opportunities to buy some of your competitors that have struggled and were not as good or able to plan as well as you were able to do. And I continue to hearken back to the It's a Wonderful Life movie where Jimmy Stewart says, Mr. Potter's not selling, he's buying. So there will be a time when everything will be on sale. And having the ability to buy at that point in time can be a very good thing. And just a couple of minutes on estimation, kind of if you want to think about what the impact is on your company. The things that we're going to be looking at or that we would look at in a traditional project environment, we would be trying to estimate how long this disruption is going to last, how deep it's going to get, and the impact that what you have to do to survive may have on the long-term effect of the company. If you take on debt so that you have cash, what does that do going forward? Those are really the 3 areas that we would focus on. And the framework that we would use, it's kind of a classic litigation tool for estimating damages and referred to as a but-for analysis. So we would look at what we thought the company would be able to do on January 1st without COVID-19, forecast that out, then take a look at where you're at now with COVID-19 and incorporating length of the disruption and impact or depth of the disruption, develop an indication of where we think things will be going forward. And I think the next slide, we have a little bit of some pictures that kind of walk us through that. The blue line is what we would have hoped for at the end of 19, and you just see steady $2 million, $2, whatever growth from 10 to 12 to 14 to 16 to 18, and that's an EBITDA number, which is a cash flow measure. And then with COVID, perhaps you went from 10, you're thinking you're going to be at 8 for 2020, and then you'll recover at 10, 12, and 14 on the same growth pattern you would have been before. So in the box down at the bottom, you can see just a very simple calculation. Without COVID, we would have been at 14 in 2021. With COVID, we're at 10 in 2021. And at a 6 multiple of that cash flow, the difference in value is very significant. Not all businesses will never recover. Some of those, for some companies, that graph would go 10 to 8, then maybe back to 10 to 15 to 16, and then ultimately catch back up again. But for some companies, it's a parallel shift, and you will be going forward at a lower level than you would have been without it, for the duration. So that's the financial part. Jim?
We'll actually turn it over to Carol now.
All right. Well, thank you. So the first thing I want to talk to you leaders about is this is an unprecedented time, right? Everybody keeps talking about how different this time is than any other time we've ever experienced. And what I want to tell you is it's okay to be human. In fact, this is the time to be exceedingly human. Uh, we always want to be so businesslike and so proper, but this is when your employees need you to be vulnerable and to tell them how you really feel, and to be able to say, hey, you know what, I don't have all the answers and I am concerned. This is the time to do that and to elevate the trust when you do that. In fact, I'd love for all of us to have a love affair right now. And instead of having a love affair with fear, I'd like us to have a love affair with hope. And so as you're talking about the reality of the situation, the tone in your voice, which is really about 38% of our communication anyway, the tone in our voice, if it transmits hope instead of this irrational fear that can really have us spiraling into anxiety and worry and panic, if we communicate with that hope, you will then transmit the hope to your staff, and they need it now. So that's the very first thing I want to say is, be honest, but be honest with joy. They need that. The second thing I want to talk to you about is, if you're expecting this to be comfortable, right? If you think, well, it's not comfortable to reach out to my staff. So we start telling ourselves these stories about how they probably don't want to be bothered anyway, right? Well, your mind is lying to you. This is the time to reach out to them. They need that connection. And we talk about social distancing. It's really social closeness that we need, and we need physical distancing. And so this right now is the time when everybody says, oh, we never have time to work on the people side. We never have time to work on the culture. Guess what? Now you're given this gift of having this time. So how do you want to show up as a leader right now? How do you want to be remembered? Because when this whole thing is over, and it will be over, what everybody's going to remember in your organization and on your team is how you dealt with it, is what you did. They're not going to, or how you made them feel. They're not going to remember the exact specifics, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And it's interesting, right? Because most of the time we hear about, people having to shut down organizations and synagogues and churches and all of these things because of hatred. And this time we're shutting down a lot of these organizations out of love, right? We're trying to save even one life. And we have, for the first time, at least in my lifetime, a time when we all have a common enemy globally. So it's bringing us together. Let's not squander this opportunity that hopefully will never come again. But this is an opportunity for us to really work on that. So let's transition a little bit into some of the fears that might be getting in the way of us getting excited about this opportunity. I think the two biggest fears that I hear all the time is, from my clients, is, that they won't have any control over the employees. And the second fear is that these employees are going to be taking advantage of their unsupervised working hours. If you think about that, it doesn't make any sense, because as long as you're doing the right thing, and the right thing here in this situation is making sure that they understand their goals, they understand what meeting expectations actually means, and what exceeding expectations actually means. And if they're doing that, then who cares if they're doing it in an office next door, at the park, or on the couch? Who cares, right? As long as they're exceeding expectations, do we really need to know if they're eating bonbons on their couch? I don't think so, right? We don't really care. And part of the problem with, being a human being, or part of the challenge, is that we have all these biases. And one of the big categories of bias, if you will, is the expedience bias that we have. And that one just, it encourages us not to go virtual because it simply doesn't feel right. So, we just say, oh no, it's just not going to work. And so if you go into this situation where, frankly, you really don't have a choice right now, right? If your staff is virtual, you've got to get on this train. But if you find yourself thinking it's not going to work, it's that bias coming into play, and that might be transmitted to your staff. So you need to just have a small mind shift here. The other big bias here is the safety bias. Right? So this is where we tend to focus on potential losses, which in this case would be, let's say, people goofing off, more than the expected gains, which would be, wow, they have so much time now to work. They don't have to commute. They don't have to, be out there in traffic on the train. There's no water cooler banter. There aren't all these distractions. We don't focus on that. We instead focus on, oh, they might be goofing off and watching Netflix, right? So if you find yourself in those situations, remember that it's normal, but I need you to get out of that, right? Because what you're feeling, you're transmitting to everybody else, okay? So if you're thinking they're not working, again, remember that as long as they have goals, and if you need help with that, we're all happy to help you, but they need to have goals. Even daily goals would be good. And on that note, now that you're being human to them, now that you're being vulnerable and you're talking to them about their goals, let's not separate personal goals and professional goals. When you're talking to them about their goals, some of their goals could be, let's just say 3 and 3, right? Let's have 3 professional goals and 3 personal goals. Some of their goals might be to take a walk and get outside today, right? Encourage that as much as you're going to encourage, get that report out. So they need you to help them with their physical health. They need to know that you care about that, about their mental health. If you're worried about what they are doing, again, don't worry about that as long as they have goals. If another one of your fears is, well, we can't really collaborate unless we're physically together. Well, we have a whole bunch of tools that we can send you that actually make you more productive when you're virtual. So that fear you can set aside as well. We're here to help you. And then the last one is, that I hear from my clients all the time is people are lazy, right? But what I'm finding is that my clients are actually calling me to say, how do I get them to take breaks now? Because they're so focused that they're forgetting to eat. They're forgetting to go outside. They're forgetting to just take care of themselves because they're working so many more hours now that there isn't that break in between. So anyways, those are the biggest fears. Now let's move on to Jim. How am I doing on time? Good.
You got about another 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about just the basics here. So this is a time when you can also make sure you have the right people on your team and that you're not stuck in one of those bureaucratic cultures where you have the wrong people on the bus, but it's because really we have a lot of incompetence and insecurity and lack of discipline in the organization. So this might be the time to make sure that you've got the right people on your team. The other thing I want to talk about is managing the system, not managing the people. So I talked a little bit about goals. The other big part about this is the time to rally around your processes and the system and get everybody together on eliminating the waste and how you make decisions, right? So if you can simplify the process and have a great system, then you're not going to need to manage the people. You could just manage the system and the people are going to be great. They're going to do what they need to do. The other piece is, if you're used to, and a lot of my clients are this way, right? They're very directive. Do what I say. I have all the answers, and that's why they call me in. If you are like that, this is not the time for that. I'd like to invite you into a different style of management, and that is the coaching style management, which is a lot more inquisitive. It's less directive. And it's the mindset that you don't have all the answers and that your staff actually has a lot more answers than you do. And when you switch to that coaching style management, it allows you to lead with compassion, to trust your team more, and to really elevate that cohesion on the team. I'm not sure if I mentioned, but one of the biggest challenges that I'm hearing from the managers and the staff that are remote right now are they just don't know what the expectations are. And so if you could please huddle with your team at least once a week. And when I say huddle with your team, I mean 5 to 7 people at least once a week. That would help them so much. Now, I really recommend, if you were my client, I'd tell you to do it every day, right? For at least 10 minutes a day. And check in. The very first thing I'd like you to do is just check in with everybody, ask them how they're showing up today to the meeting, and then have your little meeting. And then at the end, ask them how they're leaving the meeting. And what that does is, it allows you to be human and ask, and kind of get their pulse, right? If they're feeling frustrated, if they're feeling socially isolated, if they're feeling great, it allows you to see what's going on. But then it also allows you at the end to see how the meeting made a difference to them. Let's see. The other thing I want to tell you is that there's the change. There's the big change that we have, right? Everybody's now working from home. There are huge changes that I'm not going to go into because you all know. But then there's the psychological impact of the change. And everybody's in a different place when it comes to the psychological piece. So when you're talking to your staff, please understand that they might be still in this place where they're white knuckling it, where they're not letting go of the old. And so you need to know that so that you can lead them through the swamp of uncertainty into the new beginning, where they can start embracing what this new reality is, especially since we don't know when there's going to be an end to it. And also understand where you're at, right? Because if you're not there, if you're having a hard time, then let's get your mind straight first so that you can help them out of the swamp. So, Jim, do I have time? Do I keep going, or do I turn it back over to you?
This is important stuff, Carol, and I know that you could go on for hours on this, but if it's okay with you, let's move on to the operational side of this presentation. Yes. And then I want to remind everyone who is on this webinar that you can ask questions using the Q&A tab on your screen, and that'll be an opportunity to get questions into Carol, Tim, or myself. Thank you, Carol. Okay, you've heard Tim and Carol say that we don't know how bad this recession is going to be or how long it's going to last. Interestingly enough, as you probably are aware, I've been posting this webinar on LinkedIn, and I got a response from a national sales manager from a company that does manufactures automation equipment. And he said, stop being negative and get all this negativity off of LinkedIn. And I wrote back to him and I said, at the end of the day, this isn't about negativity. This is about preparing. Most boards of directors don't do a good job in creating crisis plans. And so even if we don't have a recession or we don't have a depression or it goes down an amount we don't understand, what we need to do is we need to create trigger points. And so it's important for senior leaders to sit down with their team, huddle with their team, as Carol talked about, and leverage their knowledge in order to say, what do we do if we only go down 10%? What do we do if revenues are down 25%? What do we do if revenues, worst case situation is revenues go down 50%? And it's important to plan sequentially so that you create a series of building blocks that allow you to continue your movements inside your business and how you restructure it, rather than assuming it's only going to be 10 and then having to do something drastically different if it's 25. for most middle market companies and smaller, they don't have a structured board of advisors. And we're recommending that companies create a board of advisors, even if you have a board of directors. And a board of advisors is an inexpensive way to get subject matter experts in the areas that you need most. And so it allows you to bring subject matter experts such as Carol, Tim, or myself into your sphere of decision making. The other thing that's incredibly important is to understand that as you're making changes inside your organization and responding to the situation that exists, that the sacrifice be shared. CAE Group, for example, announced day before yesterday that their CEO and his staff are going to take a 50% reduction in salary until we come out of the backside of this, and that VPs and directors were going to take a 30% cut, and managers and individual contributors and hourly workers were going to take a 10 or 15% cut. I don't remember the exact number. But to Carol's point, there's an example of true leadership where leaders are recognizing that they can better afford to contribute to the survival of the company than lower level people can. And they're demonstrating with their wallets that they are willing to share the sacrifice across the organization. Most companies are going to be faced with trying to figure out how to, or what the core group of people inside their business are going to look like. Tim was telling me the other day that he had a friend who was faced with this situation, and instead of firing or laying off the people who made the most money, he laid off a lot more of the lower level folks. And why did he do that? His response was that it's far easier for me to replace staff than it is for me to replace people who have been with this company a long time and who have far more tribal knowledge than others. Now, why I don't necessarily agree with that, I think it's an interesting perspective that needs to be discussed at the senior leadership level. I think it's incredibly important that you understand what the core group of people and what essential people and what their knowledge is, and you have to protect that. Now, here's the good news. In the bailout that was, government bailout that was announced last night, there supposedly is grants or loans that will be made available to businesses. And as long as those loans are used to keep people employed and on the payroll, they'll be transitioned into grants in the future, and the companies won't have to pay that back. And it's obviously an attempt to keep people employed inside the country. And as Carol pointed out, this is a perfect time to take those people who may not be working on orders or who may not be working on production and use them to fix things inside the organization. And we'll come back to that in a minute. When we talk about supply chains, we talk about raw material to finished goods and the delivery of those finished goods. And we talk about quote to cash, which is the technology that manages the supply chain. Let me focus on raw material to finished goods for a second. It's incredibly important that you communicate routinely with your suppliers and your customers. You need to understand what kind of issues your suppliers are being faced with in order for you to properly work out how to extend accounts payables, how to move orders out, and how to best structure your supply chain to keep it as resilient as possible. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. The next piece is your customers are in exactly the same boat. Understand what their needs are. You can find out a lot of competitive information in the marketplace by talking to the buyers of your customers and asking them a couple of simple questions. What can I do to better position myself versus my competition? it's likely that they're going to tell you a lot of things you won't be able to find out any other way. So remember, the supply chain is critically important, and communications not only with your employees, as Carol pointed out, it's important to have those huddle meetings and those communications with people across your entire supply chain. Keep an eye on your competitors and be opportunistic. Find out as much information as you can, because there's a good chance that one or two of your competitors are not going to do as well as you do, especially if you've been proactive in the beginning on your planning on how you're going to work through this temporary crisis. You may find out that you'll be on top, and you may also find out that one of your competitors will now be part of your organization. Now's a great time, now that you can keep people on board, and now that they're going to have more time on their hands, to work on the business instead of in the business. Spend more time on redefining your business model and your strategic plan. Look for the opportunities to think out of the box and reinvent yourself. Your strategic plan is not something that you created, assuming you have one, is not something you created and should be sitting up on the shelf. It should be a living, breathing document and direction. Take the time to rethink your strategic plan and focus on the future and what are the opportunities that might exist for that future. What are the value propositions you need? What customer segments can you go after? We all know that irrespective of what the government aid looks like, that there's going to need to be work done on taking costs outside of your business. We should be doing that on a routine basis, whether we are in a good economy or in a recessionary economy. And so look at the things, the costs inside your business, jettison the ones that you truly don't need, and do the analysis to understand what costs are truly fixed and what costs are truly variable. You'll be surprised at how many costs have been bundled up inside of your P&L. And when you go back and you ask, why am I doing this, or why am I spending the money on this? You'll find out that there's ways that you can take costs out of your system. We've never found a business that has been so lean that they couldn't take cost out of their system. Take time to assess and fix what's broken. Prepare for the future. Now's the perfect time to engage the people in your organization, leverage their knowledge, and do Kaizen events, and do value stream mapping, and do other types of activities that will allow you to fix processes that are broken, to eliminate shadow systems, and to leverage the technology you have inside your business. I consider myself to be a pretty darn good Excel user, and I'll bet I only use 10% of the capabilities of Excel. And in every client we work with, we find that they only use 30 or 40% of the capabilities of the technology they've invested in, such as ERP and MRP and CRM and all of those great packages that have been bolted together to make up your system. You'll find that if you get the experts from your CRM, such as Salesforce or Zoho, in and ask them, how do other clients leverage the system? You'll find that they're loaded with best practice ideas on how to better utilize that investment. Same thing with your ERP system or your MRP system. Don't be afraid to invite those folks in, even though it might cost a little bit of money. Don't be afraid to invite those folks in to give you good, sound ideas around the best practices on how to better leverage that investment. You'll find that it'll yield huge benefits to your organization. One of the other things that's really important is to understand your supply chain resilience. What do I mean by that? Well, so you're on a path inside your business to lower inventory and free up working capital to pay your bills because sales are down. When you lower that inventory, it means that you're not buying inventory from your supplier. It means that things are backing up at the supplier because they have to then lower their forecasts for raw materials and components. Make sure you understand how easy or how difficult it's going to be to get your supply chain back up to speed when we do come out of the other side of this, and make the appropriate plans to have the appropriate raw materials in place so that you can speed up the supply chain again when demand starts to increase. And when it comes to inventory, it's far better to hold inventory at its lowest cost value than in finished goods. And it's important to create a strategy around that inside your business. Evaluate the supply chain opportunities that you have. You can rethink through how you order goods, how you forecast, and also think through how your supplier dependency. So for those companies that have been in China and have the majority of their goods coming from China, they've been bitten twice now in the last year. Tariffs, COVID-19 shutting down the supply chain, Chinese New Year being extended by a couple of weeks to a month, all have wreaked havoc for companies that have a true dependency on China inside their supply chain. It's important that you reevaluate your supplier concentration and whether there are opportunities for you to open new sources of supply during this period where demand is lower. The last two things I'm going to share with you are customer review and product review. When I did the restructuring of a company in 2008, we looked closely at the profitability of every one of the customers that we were selling to, and found that there were a number of customers who had incredibly low margins. And as a team, decided to fix or exit that situation. And so we actually went to those customers and increased prices to them to get to the margin levels that we really did need to do. Because at the end of the day, we were either going to get them to agree to that or we were going to exit them as a customer. So it turns out 75% of the customers accepted the price increase. And we ended up generating significantly larger amounts of gross margin. At the same time, we looked at products and took the exact same approach. We decided to look at every product and what its profitability was and create a fix or exit strategy around that. In several instances, we were able to significantly lower the cost of the product. At the same time, go to customers with price increases, because if you don't get the margins you're looking for, you're going to exit the product. And customers take a very dim view of not being able to have product that they want to put on their shelves. So while we're in the middle of a crisis, we were able to do this. While we did lower sales by about 10%, we increased profitability by almost 30%. So it is possible in a declining market to be able to actually improve the performance of your business by taking the 80-20 rule with customers and products. Doing these things will yield a more profitable business. So in summary, think about how the economic crash of 2008 changed how we did business. What will this one do to business? We don't know. But we do have some insight based on what Carol talked about. We're going to need to take a look at how this work at home actually went, and whether we're able to continue to function with people who are not on location. Can we use tools like Slack or Asana or Microsoft Teams in order to be able to stay in constant communication with each other, even though we might be remote? That might provide opportunities for companies to downsize the amount of real estate they have and to have smaller core staffs or core teams. but we've got to do some brainstorming around what we think this is going to look like when we're out of this. You have to be reactive to some degree, and we all know that everyone's been incredibly reactive in creating plans on how they're going to protect their employees and their employees' families. And we know that they're going to need to be reactive in terms of the business side of things. I know of one company that furloughed 80% of their people because they think they're going to take a 30 or 40% hit on the top line. That's incredibly reactive. But it's incredibly important that we be proactive as well. Work on the business as well as inside the business. Engage the brilliance of your team to redesign how you do business, how you plan for the recession, and how you're going to think out of the box. Now, here's an example. About 25 or 30% of the products that are purchased by customers are used for unintended purposes. And so look at how your products are used in the marketplace. Perhaps there's an unintended purpose that creates an adjacent market for you, that you can expand the growth of that product inside the marketplace and expand your customer base. Take advantage of every penny you can get from the government. Don't be afraid to do that. And if the government ends up offering loans to you so you can keep people employed that are later going to be turned into grants, or in essence a forgiven loan, take advantage of it and keep as many people as you can to work on the business and to fix those things that are broken inside your business processes. And this one is, I'll leave you with this note. This is not a sales pitch. Spend the money on the appropriate subject matter experts who will give you a good ROI. As Tim commented earlier on, don't be afraid to hire that attorney who's going to look at your contracts and help you identify on the front end where your wiggle room is in terms of leases, in terms of supplier agreements, in terms of any other kind of contract that you might have, software and technology, for example. Make sure you understand what your wiggle room is before you go into a negotiation. Otherwise, you may end up negotiating against yourself. And so don't be afraid to spend money on outside resources. Think of those outside resources as your bench strength. The players on the bench that you need to use in very particular situations that allow you to strengthen your core team. So in summary, that is what we wanted to talk about today. And I'm going to go to the Q&A board right now because I see we have 3 questions. So here's a question. Carol, what tips do you have on how we can best support our staff to be effective workers from their homes instead of being under our watchful gaze?
Oh, well, there are several things that we can do. Number one, help them understand that they need a dedicated workspace. They shouldn't be working on their kitchen table. They need to get focused. Also, along those lines, we have a lot of people that have children and neighbors and spouses that, will try to ask for things while they're working because they're working from home. So invite them to treat it as if you were in the office and protect your time. The other thing that I think is very, very important is help them understand that every day they should be shaving and showering and putting makeup on and getting dressed as if they were going to work, at least from the waist up, and have video calls with them instead of phone calls. I think that really helps us continue with the social closeness. And to make it a little fun, what you can do is, make one day a week no video day or a pajama day or whatever, so that they have that one day that they can just slum it but still work and be there for everybody else. The other thing is the mental health. I mentioned that a little earlier. I want to make sure that your staff know that you care about them and their families. So help them understand that even if you need to help them, they should go outside every day, take a walk, Eat lunch away from their workspace. This is not the time to eat at their workspace. They need to go and separate themselves. And even if they need a timer, so they can, let's say, go hard for 45 minutes and then take a 15-minute mental break, right? This is really hard when you're working from home, but they're gonna get a lot more work done this way. And the last thing I wanna leave you with on that note is one-to-one meetings are really great for direct reports. But remember that the more you can have meetings with multiple people, like a 5 or 7 team person, like I mentioned before, it's better, because then you eliminate the game of telephone where, somebody gets the different message and, and people are not on the same page and they're not aligned. So ensure collaboration and transparency by getting a small group together when you communicate, or even in an all hands meeting. So I think those are the tips that I would give you. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Carol. But you know what? This might be a really good opportunity to take this question and actually sit down with your team and ask them if they have the watchful gaze fear.
Yes.
And get them to participate in creating and using the suggestions that you've made.
Yes, and that's a great point. This is, look, if you haven't done this when you're physically close, do it now. Always collaborate with your team. With that coaching style management, you want to make sure that the ideas are coming from them and that you're always the last one to speak. So that's a really great point, Jim. Practice that, right? Even if you have the answers in your head, shut up. Shut your mind for a second and ask the questions. Be curious, because they've got more gold in there than you know.
Thanks, Carol. Well, here's another question. How do we rethink our strategic plan when we have absolutely no idea when the future will go back to the way it was in the past? That's a great question. And I think there isn't any of us who have a crystal ball that's going to define exactly what the future is going to look like. But we do have inside our organizations an incredible brain trust. And that has been through multiple recessions, or at least multiple economic cycles. If it wasn't the 2001 downturn or the 9/11 downturn or the financial meltdown of 2008 or this one, or even going back for me, 1991, 1973, and 74, we always know that it comes back. And this is an opportunity for us to make sure that our new strategic plan has a survival component to it, and it also has a rebuild component to it. Now, there are a bunch of things we do know. We do know that while 20-some% of all goods are purchased online, now that everyone is being forced to purchase online, it's likely that even more goods are going to be purchased online as a result of this, because now we've tasted how sweet it is. And I know my wife has, to order from Walmart.com basic essentials that she always went to the store for. So there are some things that we do know. We do know that things will come back to normal. So our strategic plan needs to be focused on survival. It needs to be focused on repositioning and strengthening our internal business processes, organization from a training perspective. And we know that it's an opportunity for us to work on new products and figure out ways on how we can be more competitive in the marketplace. Those are the 3 main components I would put inside of redefining a strategic plan.
Hey, Jim.
Okay. Yes.
So what are your thoughts about having a strategy for this, just for this uncertain time? So not only having, let's say, an overarching goal or a rallying cry for this time during the crisis where they can all kind of get together and work on something, but what are your thoughts about them having just a strategic plan or a strategy based on the world right now that might just be temporary, but that can really propel them forward into those other areas that you mentioned?
Well, as I commented earlier, strategies need to be living, breathing documents, right? And so there are going to be times, as a matter of fact, with one of our clients, we're actually having a conversation about what components of the current strategy are going to be less focused on, and which components are going to be more focused on. So it is important that you insert the technical things you're going to do over the next 3 months. You can call that a strategy if you want. I view those to be more tactical when you talk about survival and how we're going to, the strategic pieces are how we're going to restructure ourselves and how we're going to move forward in the future. Okay?
Thank you.
Here's one that ultimately I think Tim needs to answer, and it goes, what do you think about getting with landlords to reduce rent? And before, Tim, you comment on that, in the 2008 recession, we saw land values go down significantly, and rents for homes and buildings go down significantly as well. Do you think we'll see the same thing here?
I think we'll see the same thing here to the extent people's business models change. So if we all have our workforces working from home, and we all, when this particular COVID-19 episode is past, and we look back at our performance and our team's performances, because we've all adopted Carol's recommendations in this process, and they're doing great things and working wonderfully, and they like it, they want more of it, we may decide that our real estate footprint can be downsized materially. That will cause a one-time shift in usage rates, occupancy rates, which the market will absorb. People don't typically tear buildings down or make them go dark, so that inventory is relatively static. So the demand will change, the supply is static, and as a result, there'll be a shift in market clearing prices on rents. So rents would likely decline. I do expect to see some of that. On the negotiating with the landlord question, leases are an interesting thing. In a Chapter 11 environment, and no one wants to go there, but you can make the kind of the threat, for lack of a better word. And certainly if you have an attorney, they can make the threat for you, which is always more fun. Leases are rejectable in a Chapter 11. So if you have 100 locations, you run small retail, and you have 100 different retail locations, and you evaluate 20 of them as not being economically viable going forward, in a Chapter 11 environment, you can strip those 20 off. So to have a conversation with that landlord and say, look, this site is not working for me, and it certainly isn't going to work going forward. I need some help if you and I collectively want this store to be open in 6 months or a year. We're not contemplating a Chapter 11 at the moment, but frankly, if we were in one, you'd be getting a rejection notice. So, what can we do? And if a landlord's response is, hey, look, I got people that want this space at the same price, great. Then that's probably the right answer. Trade out of it and let them trade somebody else into it, and they go forward happy, and you've reduced a drain on the business. But it really comes down to location by location in terms of evaluating your needs. In many cases in professional services, the thought is, we'll suffer for a bit through this process. We'll be a little bit leaner and smarter coming out of it, a little more work from home, but eventually we'll need to absorb or want to absorb that old space again with more people in a more efficient format. So to hold on to it for 6 months or a year and then gradually grow back into it, that's perfectly fine. Have a conversation with the landlord about your economics and where you are on a location by location basis, because you have some leverage that you don't have in some other cases in other areas.
Thanks, Tim. It's 10 o'clock, and we were scheduling this for 1 hour, but there are 2 questions left. So if it's okay with everybody, we'll go ahead and address those 2 questions. The question was, what about market development and product development? And this kind of goes back to the question around strategic plan. Product development is one of those things you never want to stop. And in some clients that we've worked with, we've actually gone back into their product development closet and looked at products that they had worked on over the last 1, 2, 3 years, but never introduced into the marketplace. There's a great opportunity to rethink through those products, because you already have sunk cost into that product development, and see if now's the right time to reintroduce those for a minimal amount of money. There's a saying that the company that it is most profitable right before they go into bankruptcy because they've stopped investing into the business. So while there may be some product development projects you may stretch out, product development is one of the key things you have to do in order to be healthier when we come out of this. Same thing with market development, as I had commented earlier. You might find unintended uses for existing products that will allow you to easily jump into adjacent markets. Now, one of the other things we do know is that if you're going to have employees who are going to be working on the business, take a look at what your social media plan is and how you do B2B sales, and should you have vendor portals and customer portals to make it easier for you to be on a continuous communication basis with your customers. So never stop product and market development. I'm a fan of taking cash out of the business, lowering inventories to free up cash, because product and marketing development is what's going to make you thrive in the future and allow you to continue as a going concern. The other question was, how do you prioritize your actions? We've talked about a whole bunch of things today. And how do you go about prioritizing the tactics that you're going to do over the next 3 or 6 months? That's not an easy question to answer because it's really dependent on where your business is in its life cycle and what industry you serve. So as Tim talked about, having 100 locations, you're likely going to want to have a higher priority for readjusting your leases than if you're a consulting firm like mine, where you don't have leases, but you want to be focused on developing new business. So it's really important to sit back and ask the questions, look at all of your cost structures, look at everything you do, and prioritize your actions based on the highest return to the business. But first you need to decide, is it future return to the business or immediate return to the business? And depending on what your needs are, that's how you have to prioritize it. So there's not going to be a model that's going to be one that fits for everybody in how you go through your checklist and prioritize those activities. Okay, that covers all the questions today. I'm going to open the mic up to see if Carol or Tim have any last thoughts to share, but I certainly do want to thank everyone who's joined us for your participation. Carol, any last thoughts?
I just want to say, don't shy away from your people, even though it might be uncomfortable or you might not want to reach out. Please do reach out. They need you. Thanks,
Carol. Tim?
Yeah, I would just like to say, a Stephen Covey quote of act or be acted upon. So understand your company, understand your resources, make plans, and we'll all get through this.
Thanks, Tim, and thank you everyone for participating. Hope you have a great day, and if there's any opportunity that we can do to help you or your clients, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Bye.